Delhi's urban villages are a battleground between the formal and the informal, the traditional and the contemporary, market forces and community values, the aspirations of the elite and the desperations of the poor. Its plight is symptomatic of a systemic and systematic failure of the state in preparing vulnerable rural populations for the onslaught of urbanization. With one third of the city's population at stake, a bleak future beckons action today. The story of Delhi is incarnated in its villages. It stood testament as Delhi became the capital of kingdoms and empires that ruled the subcontinent over 1,000 years. But post independence, a rapidly urbanizing Delhi engulfed its villages one by one. A planning model tainted by colonialism and inherited from the West advised a fragmented and segregated land use approach to supposedly protect and retain the rural character. Thus, the residential area of the village was circumscribed by a virtual red thread or lal dora, while large swaths of agricultural land were seized by the state from farmers with little compensation. The 135 urban villages in Delhi doubled its population in the last 10 years, adding a total 2.4 million people, with some villages seeing populations rise by above 700%. Technically, like planned developments, urban villages have tenure security and land ownership, but it is exempted from getting building permits. The farmers, in search of alternate means of livelihood, found opportunity in this loophole and resorted to opening businesses, small scale industries, and renting out their premises. The state's inefficiency in handling the affordable housing crisis meant that the flood of low and middle class migrants from rural India found a modest home here. Decades of unhindered development has led to slumming and uninhabitable conditions. Absence of enforcement have led to loss of heritage and serious environmental contamination from industries and even from upscale restaurants frequented by the urban elites in search of that chic, tempting village charm in a rambling city night. Shrouded underneath the glitz, glamour, and the gleaming neon lights is a world rife with crime, caste based segregation, alcoholism, domestic violence, and other antisocial activities. Recently, the government offered some amnesty, giving residents clear titles in exchange for fees. But this was mostly restricted to the villages gentrified by the urban elites and largely ignored villages that needs serious attention. In the hope of a state intervention in the future, the low and middle class continues to invest in this high risk grey real estate market mired by ambiguous boundaries and ownership rights. In its essence, the urban villages are a microcosm of Delhi's planning issues in both the formal and the informal. When a village is regularized by the state, a dominant top down urban planning and governance system is imposed upon an inherently participatory rural governance system, creating conflicts between the state's interests and community values. In its approach to curbing unregulated growth, it is apparent that the state sees the residents as illicit benefactors and cheaters of a compromised system. In contrast, the residents see themselves as victims who were forced to compensate for the many failures of the state over decades. The executive branch of the state did not keep in pace to produce pragmatic development laws in time, which often led the courts to direct development laws. It is no surprise that these laws produced by undemocratic means fails to capture the collective needs of the community. The villagers have lost faith in a system that has repeatedly failed them and are generally resistant to any major interventions.
हम जो अपना हक मांग रहे हैं भीख नहीं मांग रहे
ठीक है जी ना तो कूड़ा गेट कीजिएगा ना किते लाकड़ी गेट कीजिएगा इन मत को सेट हुस्सा मत लाकड़ी गेट तुम नहीं पता एक बात एक के करें अब हमारे पास
Any intervention to remedy the damage today should address this fundamental predicament. It was the villages that took on the burden of adapting to the absence of the state. Is the state then justified to selectively penalize the victims, the poor, in the name of public interest? Past lessons teach us that any action to reshape urban villages should be taken with a community led vision, respecting the residents' right to self determination and without compromising on its traditional systems and characteristics. This calls for a radical grassroots participatory planning and governance model with the collective goal of making Delhi's urban villages resilient, inclusive, authentic, and self sufficient. Mahatma Gandhi used to preach that the future of India lies in its villages. The world has changed, but perhaps the future of Delhi lies in how we deal with our urban villages.